Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. Sinclair Broadcasting, the largest owner of local television stations in the country, recently required news anchors at its almost 200 television stations to read from the same script condemning media bias and fake news. The concern is that staunchly conservative Sinclair was parroting President Trump, mixing politics with news, and perhaps seeking favorable treatment from the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Sinclair says it's legitimate to be critical of media bias. Sinclair may soon be the owner of 3 TV stations in St. Louis. With me in studio to talk about it all is Shula Newman, St. Louis Public Radio Executive News Editor, and Bill Freivogel, Journalism Professor at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, that is. Thank you both for being with us. Good to have you.
Hello.
Bill, let me begin with you. What do you make of this whole Sinclair thing? There's been a lot of criticism of the action. Is it justified? The criticism?
I think the criticism is justified. I mean, if you just looked at the transcript, I mean, you might say, well, what's the problem? Of course, nobody wants fake news. No professional journalist wants fake news. The trouble is that Sinclair, if you know the context, Sinclair is adopting President Trump's idea of fake news, which is actually the real news that Washington Post and the New York Times are broadcasting. And one thing is that the people who are the Sinclair news people who were reading this script were the anchors on their programs, by and large. And, these are anchors who have spent oftentimes careers building reputations for credibility. And, suddenly they are serving as the mouthpieces for this, basically sort of pro-Trump take on the media. And, local TV news is really an important source of information, of political and public policy news for the American people. A lot more people get their news from local TV news than they do from the nightly news or from newspapers, for example. I think they're just sort of behind Facebook as a leading source of news.
I think they reach about 40% of the households in the country. Shula, what's your take on it?
So I think it's fascinating, and I think it's very frightening. What Sinclair had been doing for years was sending packages, pre-recorded packages, to news stations and requiring them to run them, which, in and of itself, it's maybe the same, you could say, as us, St. Louis Public Radio, the way that we work. We run Morning Edition and we run All Things Considered. Nobody's telling us we have to run those shows, but they are part of the mix of things that we put on the air. But for local TV stations, they are really serving a local community. And as Bill said, especially the news anchors that have been here forever, part of what makes them so effective is the relationship that they have with the community. So first the Sinclair is encroaching on the autonomy of these local stations by saying, here's a segment that you must run. That's interesting. And then it's also here's commentary that must run. And the commentaries were always very right-leaning and made a lot of news directors uncomfortable. And yet they have to run them, so they run them. But then to take it to this next step of putting words in people's mouths and putting words, as you say, of these trusted living room characters, I find that very, very disturbing. And especially because the script, which I wish I brought a copy with me, basically puts out a lot of statements without any substantiation, that other news organizations are putting out stories without fact-checking. It's like, I don't point me to a legitimate news organization that is doing that. It's very disturbing.
Sinclair says it's concerned about the troubling trend of irresponsible one-sided news stories plaguing the country today.
Plaguing.
Is there really a difference between this and a newspaper editorial?
Yes, because a newspaper editorial is in a section of the paper that is, whose mission is, this is our angle, this is what we think about a certain issue. It's not forcing the journalists the Rachel Littmans of the world to go out and say you can only report this story from this angle, or you can only say these things. It's very different. It absolutely crosses the line.
Bill, which brings to mind the other point that this certainly was not labeled as opinion or commentary. It wasn't labeled at all.
No, it wasn't. Quite a number of their must-reads, must-carry pieces that are commentaries are labeled, I believe, as commentary. And they're oftentimes by like former Trump administration spokespeople, like Boris Epstein. On
there
various.
was also the head of Sinclair themselves, who did a couple of those.
Right. So those oftentimes have been labeled, but this was not.
Yeah. Conservative columnist Jonah Goldberg in USA Today wrote a couple of days ago that cable networks do the same thing in a different way in their promotional material. Is he right on that, or is he wrong? They are promoting themselves in a specific point of view.
I mean, I'll be glad to criticize some of the cable networks as well. I mean, I listen to a lot of CNN, MSNBC, Fox News on my way back and forth to Carbondale, giving me plenty of time to do that. And, they're all three are incredibly biased. And I think they hurt their credibility by doing that. Now, I wouldn't put them all in exactly the same. Each is sort of a different issue. Fox News has got these people like Fox and Friends and Hannity. Hannity coming up with these conspiracy theories that have no basis at all. You don't find that kind of thing on MSNBC or CNN, but you do find, on both of those cable networks, you find a very heavy slant against President Trump.
Right,
I happen to agree with it, but
especially on MSNBC, where they give somebody like Rachel Maddow the ability to step away, and I put quotes around that, from her role as a journalist to give her commentaries, which are very slanted to the left. But then she's supposed to. But then I don't understand how you can take that same person and have her step back into the role of an unbiased journalist when you know what her bias is the whole time.
You've talked to some television people, I understand, Shula. What is their response to this?
Most of them are horrified by it, and they've known people who are in the television world. They've heard about this for a while. It wasn't news to them. Of course, this latest bit with the having the anchors actually read a script is different. But apparently in Cincinnati, the anchor that read the script has been getting death threats, which is terrifying in and of itself. And this the local public radio station in Cincinnati reported on this. I am very proud to say, but they. Part of the point of the question was, why would somebody do this? Why would a 30-year veteran anchor on the local news, on the evening news, why wouldn't he just say no to reading
Only
this?
one station did in the entire country of the 190 or so. That was in Madison, Wisconsin.
In Madison, Wisconsin, yeah.
Well, they call it the golden handcuffs in television. They make pretty good money, and they don't want to jeopardize that. So that may be playing a role.
Right, especially with their contracts that have them give an awful lot of that money back.
We have a tweet here from Dan who writes, can you talk about how Sinclair is able to replace a traditional newscast with an opinion-based show like the Allman Report? Seems like a break in the promise to devote time to local news coverage. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I do think it makes it. One thing that Sinclair has said in connection with the purchase of the Tribune Company and the fact that they'd end up with three stations here in St. Louis is that, they will sell Channel 11, and on Channel 2 they will have all sorts of local news programs, I think 5 or 6 during the day. But if you look at their track record at Channel 30, it really makes you wonder whether we can count on that kind of a pledge, because Allman, the Media Matters Group has called him a Hannity wannabe. And certainly, he is trafficked in the same kind of conspiracy theories that Hannity did. The Seth Rich claimed, assassination of a DNC person that turned out to have no truth at all. So, I think you have to wonder about, can we really take their promises seriously?
Allman is only there because Sinclair, when it first came into purchased Channel 30, fired the entire news department, just disbanded it, and went to Frasier reruns. So, they didn't have any commitment to news when they came into St. Louis.
No, and I don't think that Sinclair is known for having a track record of really improving local news. I mean, think about these must-run features that they are sending in. This is on national stuff. This isn't like local investigative reporting like they claim they're going to give us at Channel 2 if they get to take over.
There's an interesting slant to this story too, and that is the FCC has to rule yet on this purchase, this big blockbuster purchase of some 40 television stations. You're nodding, Shula. It makes a lot of people think that what they're trying to do is to bow down to Mr. Trump so they get this thing pushed through the FCC.
They've been bowing down to Trump for a long time. Apparently, the owner of Sinclair has very close relationships with Ajit Pai, the current head of the FCC, and it's. I was reading one article that said that for years, even before Trump came into office, they were already talking with Pai about basically getting rid of a lot of the regulations from the Obama era, especially. And in fact, I was reading the FCC's website this morning. Part of their stated mission now, point number 4, I believe, of the overview, was to deregulate the FCC, which basically gives companies like Sinclair the ability to purchase more stations and to grow even bigger than they are. And I agree, the track record that Sinclair has coming in, their thinking is, if we deregulate and own more stations, then we can provide more resources to local stations and upgrade the equipment and do everything so that local stations are that much stronger. But instead, they're also able to sort of strong-arm local stations and local journalists into reporting on things and giving them these pieces that are mandated on a national level that are not relevant to local news.
We talk about undermining the credibility of their own people who have read these statements. Bill, I wonder if that can extend to non-Sinclair stations where the public might become suspicious and curious as to whether or not they are reading a party line script of some sort.
Well, I think it could well do that because I don't think that the typical viewer knows who owns the station. I mean, I bet most people don't realize that Sinclair owns Channel 30. So yeah, I think the typical viewer is not going to know exactly what anchor it is he or she shouldn't trust, and just will be more generally distrustful.
We have a couple of calls coming in. Let's take those and see what people have on their minds. We'll start with David calling from Webster Groves. David, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi. Thanks so much. First, I have to get in a plug here. Shula, your time on the fundraisers is always my favorite. I will actually tune in for that.
Yay, thank you.
Your brand of comedy sits really well with me. Anyway, what I had to say is I know this Sinclair piece is really railing against fake news, but I think it's really important to talk about what do they mean by the definition of fake. Basically, what it means in 2018 is just information that's unfriendly to the president. It doesn't mean that it's not factual. It doesn't mean that it's not true. It doesn't mean that someone didn't actually witness this and can measure it and it happened. It's just he doesn't want it said publicly. Therefore, it's fake. It's kind of like the difference between sin and shame. Sin is doing the bad act, and shame is having to deal with it. And I think that's really what this whole and honestly, it's now a generation of people who see fake news, and just because I don't want to know that, I don't want to believe it, I just can now disregard it.
David, thank you for the call.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, right after the 2016 election, there were a lot of stories about how there had been fake news going around that might have affected truly fake news, false news, like the Comet Pizza Parlor,
Babygate or whatever that was.
Yeah, that Hillary Clinton was supposedly involved in. That was really just being broadcast, being spread by Russian operatives. And so there was this initial the fake news. Maybe it had some effect on the election, and Trump in sort of a very brilliant way sort of a political jujitsu, like appropriated that phrase and pasted it on all of the media he didn't like. The Amazon, Washington Post, CNN, New York Times, and so when we see Sinclair using the fake news, they're using it from the Trump dictionary,
the Trumpian perspective,
which isn't fake news.
Interestingly, this term "fake news" is caught on around the world. And all over the world, they're using that.
I think I just read is it Malaysia or Singapore or one of those countries is making it illegal to broadcast fake news. Of course, again, the fake news they don't like is the stuff that's criticizing the people running the country.
Sure. Let's take another call. Ron joins us. He's calling from St. Louis. Go ahead, Ron.
Yes, I was calling. I believe that this type of use of the airways, which belong to the public by a private corporation to promote their ideology and their candidate, is wrong. And I urge that the listeners across the country identify the advertisers on Sinclair stations and boycott them. This would be a great idea for young people in journalism school across the country, and people who care about the right to vote and be represented, to show them that, okay, if they want to put fake news on, we're going to identify your advertisers and tell our constituents not to use them.
Ron, thank you so much for the call. Well, he makes an interesting point. The airwaves do belong to the people, theoretically.
And boycotts have been successful.
Yeah, the power of the purse. Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, Laura Ingraham was just had a boycott against her for criticizing the
student
Hogg
from Parkland.
From Parkland.
Yeah.
So those things can have an effect.
Yep.
Here is another statement, or part of a statement from Sinclair. Sinclair accuses some media of trying to control what people think. I mean, that's their complaint. But isn't this action that they've just accomplished really kind of the same thing?
Isn't that, though, what propaganda is all about? I mean, this is, there's, I once saw this wonderful exhibit at the Holocaust Museum in D.C., actually, that was all about propaganda and how the Nazi propaganda machine worked. And it worked through things like this, by calling out everything that they don't think supports their vision as being improper, and replacing it with their vision that's this horrible cycle of like, what we're telling you is truth, even though it's not truth, but you say it enough times, it becomes true.
It's always a question to equate anyone with Nazis or Nazism.
I'm not equating.
But you hear this all the time with regard to picking out scapegoats in society, people to pick on immigrants and blacks and what have you. So you hear it a lot.
I think I was making the equation more because if anything that we can learn from history about Nazi Germany is that they were brilliant in their propaganda and their use of propaganda. And this is, and I'm not saying that Trump is like the Nazis at all. I'm just saying that if they're using smart methods for propaganda.
I mean, I think Sinclair in that statement you just read is sort of using the same kind of jujitsu that Trump did. They just have put out propaganda that they've required their anchors to read, and they get criticized, and so they call the other guy the critics propaganda. I mean, we really have to be concerned about a situation where we have these big lies that are being propagated by the most powerful office in the world as true, like that Amazon owns the Washington Post. It doesn't.
Right.
The CEO of Amazon owns the Washington Post, or that all these Mexicans coming to the United States are rapists. I mean, these are these big lies that are being propagated and to set us against each one another.
But you're an attorney also, as well as a journalist, Bill. Is there anything inherently illegal about this action?
No. You can't. The First Amendment protects political lies.
We have to wrap this up. A final thought, Shula? Something you feel needs to be said?
I'm still. I went down into the rabbit hole about the FCC and how it's been changing the policies, and I still think that the whole reason that they are deregulating the FCC at Sinclair's request is supposedly to put Sinclair on equal footing with the CNNs of the world and the MSNBCs, which our cable, essentially. And I think it's very just interesting that now Sinclair is able to do what they are claiming the CNNs and the Fox Newses of the world can do.
They say that the 190 or 200 stations that Sinclair owns, assuming this purchase
200.
goes through, will be 200 Fox News channels, the short version of them, but the same thing. Bill, a final thought?
Well, I just think Sinclair is sort of this station that no one's exactly heard about, but they could have more influence on people's news intake than the ones we have heard about.
Right. Okay, I thank you both for being with us, Shula Newman and Bill Freivogel. Interesting discussion. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it as time goes on. Thank you.
Okay.
Coming up, Metro wants your input on improving bus service. That's next on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.